Okay, well, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me here to speak. Um, I hope you can all hear me correctly. If not, please just write it down in the chat, and we'll try to solve it. As Ortem said, I am a Catalan myself. I've been an activist for language revitalization for a while, and not just in Catalan. I've worked with languages such as Basque, Calabrian Greek in southern Italy. Now I'm working with Frisian mostly because it's the local language in Friesland, which is where I live. And it's also basically where I work. I work with the Department of Frisian Minorities and Multilingualism at the University of Groningen. Part of my research, or well, my research is mostly on strategies for language revitalization. And part of it, a big part of it, is on social media and how we can use social media for these languages. Um, I'm going to give a presentation. Feel free to ask anything in the chat, and I may answer the question right away or wait until the end, but I will get to your questions. So in this presentation, at first, I want to give you some overview on media and language revitalization. And here, when I say media, I mean traditional media outlets such as TV or radio or newspapers. How we have talked about this and what we have been done with this. And then I'll move on to computer mediated communication, how this has changed the ways we conceive of media and the ways we communicate with each other, and even the ways we think of language. Then we're going to be talking about digital language divides and digital language presence, why this is important and what we can do about it. And we'll move on to social media and language revitalization proper, what's being done and what's being said now about this. Finally, we'll talk about the importance of virtual communities for minority languages. And then I'll have some examples. The Europe Minority Languages Project, which I am the creator of and the coordinator of, so I will tell you all about that. And also I have some other examples of practices for language revitalization in social media. And at the end, we'll have some overview of the challenges that we face and the opportunities that we have with social media. And I also added at the end a list of all the references I'm going to be using, so you can also find these references and read them on your own. But before we start, I just wanted to remind you or tell you that this year it's the UN's International Year of Indigenous Languages. And there's a whole social media campaign. There's a lot of other things, but the main campaign is the hashtag IYIL 2019. So I just want to encourage you to use this hashtag in your social media posts in whatever platform. You can tweet, post on your language, some fact about your language or some information that you want to share, or in your language. You can just tweet something in your language and use this hashtag. And the idea is to increase language diversity and the visibility of these languages in social media. So feel free to use that. You have the hashtag, and if you want to tweet about this webinar, you can also use this hashtag. So let's start with media, and before we go to more specific things, it's important to remember that language is one of the things that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights establishes that we cannot be discriminated against for. Sorry. This means that if we have the right to access information, it's the hashtag. I'm going to write it again. It's at the foot of the PowerPoint also. It's this one. Yeah. So as I was saying, language is one of the things that we cannot be discriminated against according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And therefore, if we have the right to access information, we also have the right to have this information in a language we can understand. And this is not often the case. We'll talk about this more later, but just a reminder that that we have this right recognized by most countries in the world. The UN also has the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that establishes the rights to use and transmit your language, and also the rights to establish your own media in your own language. Now, this declaration is a bit problematic because there is no definition of what indigenous means, but still, the indigenous peoples have the right to have their own media in their own languages. Moving on to Europe, the Council of Europe in 1992 passed the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages, which has not been ratified by all the members of the European Council, but still most of them have signed it. And in its Article 11, it talks about media, and it says that states should provide, should ensure, encourage, or facilitate, depending on what the state chooses, the creation of at least one radio station, one TV channel, and one newspaper in the regional or minority language. And whenever this is not possible, at least the creation of some programs in this TV or radio in the regional language, or the publication of some articles in the newspapers in this language. However, this is also not normally observed. Even the definition of minority language in the charter is a bit debatable. And there's also the fact that the states get to decide what language gets recognition and to what extent. So a state can just say, yes, I recognize this language, but I'm only going to encourage the publication of articles, and that may just be nothing. Also interesting here is to talk about the Barcelona Universal Declaration of Linguistic Rights and the Girona Manifesto on Linguistic Rights. These two documents are not treaties of the UN, even though they have been proposed and they have been shared by UNESCO. They are not official treaties, but it's the closest thing we have to a Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And among these rights, there's also the right to media. So media is a constant in all these in all these provisions for language maintenance. And we know that media is important. It has been observed. It has been talked about in many previous research. But most of the discourse on language revitalization comes from Fishman's publications on reversing language shift, and that was in 1991. Later on, he published in 2001 a reviewed version of this. And he was not very fond of media. And most language activists are not very fond of media because they, as he said here, it creates virtual communities and it doesn't revert back to the use in the family or the use among friends, which is also something that has been criticized by some other researchers. That okay, if media is good, it should correlate with language use in the real world. It should correlate with actual language use. Here we have a lot of problems because we don't, well, what is actual language use? Of course, well, in 2001, there was no Twitter, so a tweet was not language use. It was not even conceived of as language use, but now we know that this is actual language use. And there's also the fact that it's almost impossible to establish the relationship between this. Even in some communities that do have some media, for example, I come from Catalonia, and we do have our own TV station, TV channel. And it has been said that the fact that we have a TV in Catalan has encouraged the language use, but that this is actually very difficult to prove because normally when you have the infrastructure to set up media in your own language, you also have other things. You have schooling in your language, or at least the language is recognized and is present in the school. You may even have some other services for the language, some other kind of media in the language, some incentives to use the language and to learn it. So it's difficult to establish and to say that, yes, media has a direct correlation with language use. However, it's very, very likely that it does play a role in media. And if we move on to now, 20 years later, 20 years after Fishman's first criticism of media, or criticism of the importance of media for some activists. If we move on, we see that nowadays media is everywhere, and especially social media is everywhere. And what Fishman criticized because it was a virtual community, we see now that, well, virtual communities are normalized, and we all belong to some Facebook group, or we follow a hashtag on Twitter, or we follow a YouTube channel, and all these things can be said to constitute virtual communities. And the virtual world is as real as the actual real world. And we see it in sentences like it has been said that if it's not on the internet, it doesn't exist. Because when something is actually not found on social media or on the internet, we know this, and we know this very, very obviously. It's like, oh, this is missing. This is not on social media. This is not on the internet. Why is it so? So we have changed these things. We have changed the way we conceive of media, and media is not anymore something that the government is providing for us. It's something that we are actually actively engaging in and creating, which relates to this taxonomy of media, these three different stages that have been suggested for the creation and establishment of media for minority communities. The first stage, the gifting stage or the gifting era, is when the state authorities grant media to some communities. So in the case of Ireland, for example, the Irish government said, we're going to create a radio station and a TV station for Irish. The case of Basque country or Catalonian, the same. In the 80s, when the language got recognized and got its co-official status, the regional government said, we're going to establish these media for these communities. Now, this is, as the name says, a gift. So the state controls these communities. The state controls this media, decides what is in the media, decides how much money goes into this media, and it is basically the state that is providing this media, and the communities don't get a lot of say in it. Later on, we face a service era, and that's when a lot of community-based organizations start talking about media and start influencing the media that is being offered, even establishing new medias, new community medias, for example, Tele or Brest Web. These are two website online TV stations in Occitan and in Breton, which were not offered by regional governments in France or by the French government, because we know that the French government is not very fond of linguistic diversity, and they established these new TV channels, which are not properly TV because they are online and they are just a collection of videos that you can watch, but still, these communities started their own media, and it's also the time when interfaces get translated into different languages. For example, Google Chrome available in different languages, or Facebook also in different languages. You have here a screenshot I just took this morning. I just changed my Facebook to Tatar and I took the screenshot. So you can use your Facebook in Tatar, for example. And this is the service era. It's when users start demanding something back, and they get some concessions, some new media, and some translations. For Facebook, for example, it's mostly community-based translation. So Facebook opens it, and you can start suggesting translations, and then you get the Facebook in your language. And finally, we get to what I think is the most important part of it, and for us, talking about social media, the performance era. And this is when the state is no longer the provider of media, and not even community media, but the individual itself can create media. You can use WordPress to create your own newspaper. How many people read that newspaper? That depends, but you can do that. You have the option now of creating your own individual media and setting up your own communities. And these communities it doesn't have to be with your next door neighbor or anybody in your local village. You can set up a community with somebody who lives across the world, and that has changed everything about the way we talk and the way we use media. And also, it has changed everything about the way we conceive of language. These new communities um, can be or have appeared because of the computer-mediated communication. Computer-mediated communication, or CMC, has changed everything about the way we interact with each other. And now we no longer have to be in the same place. We don't have to be in the same time frame. And this is also problematic for minority languages because, in general, minority languages are associated to a particular place. And they're often associated also with not modern, and computer-mediated communication is modern. So it has also changed the way we think about minority languages. Now, I don't have to use my minority language to talk with my neighbor. I can use it to talk with anybody anywhere in the world, obviously, who also uses my language, or who also understands the language I'm using. The study of computer-mediated communication has had a huge impact on many aspects of the study of language. I'm not going to go over all of these, but I just wanted to share this with you so you can have some references and some ideas of the topics that have been discussed. But especially for us, and we've got language activism, we've got language vitality and revitalization, language ideologies, and language use. There's been a lot of studies on language use in social media. And maybe for you, for the Mafun Academy, it's important to mention Pishlogar's work on Udmurt. I think he's somewhere among the attendees of this webinar. And there's also a lot of work on language policy going around this idea. So moving on to the impact of the internet, we know that around half the population of the world, or even more, is an active internet user, somebody who uses the internet very often. And this, of course, has some impact on language. It has been reported that around 30% there's somebody who has problems with the echo. Okay, yes, I will share the presentation later. Yes. Okay. Does everybody have problems with the echo? Okay. Okay, so I may suggest logging out and logging in again, and maybe that works. Okay. So 30% more or less of all online content has been reported to be in English. And then there's around 25% in Chinese, and around 25% is divided among Russian, German, Portuguese, French, well, all these big languages. So we know that the internet is not as linguistically diverse as the real world. We have a problem here. Languages are not represented in the internet the way they should be. It's a little bit better than it used to be, because some years ago, English was half of all the content. But still, we know that this is actually changing, but it's only changing in favor of a small group of languages. And this creates a lot of problems. We said before that we have the right to not be discriminated because of language. So we have the right to access information in a language we understand. And this is not true for information found in the internet. We don't have the same linguistic rights on the internet. We don't have the same digital opportunities. We cannot access all the information in a language we understand. We often have to go through another language, which we may be familiar with, but not very fluent in, and that's a problem. We don't have equal access to technological development, and this is not just a problem for minority languages or for languages without a state. It's also a problem for languages like Icelandic, and they are actually facing a problem with this, and they are spending a lot of money trying to keep up with new technologies in their own language. Um, and we also have, well, this also means unequal opportunities for language survival. How do we deal with that and what we can do? Well, first, just some example. Here we have the Wikipedia page for mammal in English. So just let's say that you want to look at some information, you want to know what a mammal is and scientifically what that means. You log in Wikipedia and you find your information in English. Now I'm using Wikipedia because Wikipedia is one of the it's one of the most linguistically diverse websites that you can find online. But it still is a reflection of all these problems that I just talked about. Here you have information in English, but let's say that you don't speak English and you want to access information in Tatar. And this is what you get in Tatar, which is still quite okay, but it's obviously not as thorough as the English one. So this is what we have in Tatar, but it gets even worse. This is what we have in Western Mari. Now, it is barely just a definition and a list of some species. I don't speak Western Mari, but that's what I get from here. It's a classification, I guess, and there's some at least a small definition. And then there's the Irish one. So even languages like Irish, that is a state language, don't have a lot of information available. So if you're an Irish speaker, you will go to the English because you speak English also, and then you just access this information in English, but you don't really have the right, or the right is not really observed that you to access this information in your language. Actually, if we go for the Wikipedia articles that we can find in different European minority languages, it's the distribution is not at all equal. Yeah? We have a lot of articles in Catalan and in Basque. Again, these two minorities are not the typical minorities because they do have a very strong language policy. And Catalan, even though it's not a state language, is spoken by 10 million people, so it's not really representative of most minority cases. But we've got like Bretson, for example, has a very good Wikipedia, but we can see that it's not they're not represented equally. We have a problem. This is just the number of articles. We've just seen also before the number of articles doesn't mean a lot of things because we can have articles that barely have any information in them. So again, this digital language divide poses a problem. And where can we find these languages? Now, I think my gut is that they are in social media. That we can find these languages in social media. We just have to look hard for them, but we can find them in social media. If almost half the population of the world was an active internet user, we have that 40% of the population of the world uses social media. That's a huge percentage. We can use that, and especially in the Western world, in Europe and in North America, especially, this is very, very high, right? So if we're dealing with European languages, it's likely that we can find them on social media. Facebook is the most widely used platform on social media, even though it's not the most popular among the youth anymore, but it's still the most widely used social media platform, followed by YouTube, WhatsApp, and I think in fifth place or sixth place in 2018 was Twitter. There's a lot of research done on Twitter though, because it's public and you can access everyone's feed without having to friend them, which is not the case in Facebook and definitely not the case in WhatsApp. But still, these are very widely used, and therefore, if they are so widely used, we should be taking them into account when we talk about language revitalization. Now, digital language presence or using minority languages in social media, in the internet, and having them available for all users has been said to be beneficial for many reasons. Possibly the most important reason is that it helps bring scattered communities together. That means displaced communities, for example, the speakers of Kiribati who are now living in New Zealand because they had to leave the islands because of climate change. They can still communicate in their language. Or speakers of languages like Ladino and Yiddish that live all over the place are also they can also communicate among each other because of these of social media, and digital language presence helps with that. Okay, somebody's asking why do you consider WhatsApp a social media? Um, Good question. WhatsApp is a tool for computer mediated communication, definitely. And it's social media in the sense that you can also create groups where you share information. So I guess it's somewhere between personal communication and social media. Yeah, it can be used as a social media tool. Yeah. Okay. So it's also helpful for communities that are undergoing process of reclamation. I think this is interesting for us. A community that has little to no funding available for them or no recognition by the government. It's very difficult for a community like this to establish a place to learn the language and to teach the language. So they can just turn to Facebook and create their group in Facebook to use and practice and teach the language, right? For example, there's very interesting examples with Mapudungun or Mapuche in Chile and in Argentina, or Calabria and Greco in the south of Italy. They're using these tools to teach their language and to practice the language. And it also helps with transnational communication, with even communities that are reasonably stronger. So if you're a Basque speaker and you move to the States, you no longer have to, just renounce using the language in everyday life. You can actually still use it in social media, with messages with your family or with a group, and you can actually have your group that you still use it. And also for many minority languages, social media is a context to break with different minorization status. They can use different registers. You can use a language in different ways and in different domains that you cannot normally use in your everyday life. This can be, for example, pop culture references. If your language is a minority language, chances are that Harry Potter may not be available in your language, or the movies are not available in your language. Maybe the book is in some of them, but in most of them it's not. But you can still explore all these pop cultural references and use it with your language, and associate your language to the pop culture, to the mainstream culture of the moment. For example, here you have a couple of memes. I'm very fan. I'm a huge fan of memes. And you've got a meme in Basque here that says, it translates to Basque still, always. If you're familiar with the Harry Potter series, you understand that this is a sentence that everybody knows about this series. They just change, of course. It's not you're still in love with that person. It's Basque, the language. It's a pretty clever use of the pop culture reference. And then from the movie Taken, for example, you've got here the meme by the Office du Juré, which I recommend you follow because they tweet a lot of very interesting stuff about Juré, and Juré has very recently been made one of the official languages of the island of Jersey. So they're going through interesting stuff. And they have this meme here saying, "I will look for you, I will find you, and I will speak to you in Juré." Yeah? They have a very sometimes aggressive way of promoting their language, but a very interesting way and a very fun way through memes and pop culture references. Now, all these digital language presence, they use the fact that we can have minority languages on social media, the fact that we can see them on the internet. It has been said that it encourages people to use the language. As we said before, though, it is very difficult to pinpoint and very difficult to say that it is only digital language presence that encourages the use, but it seems to be related. If we see it online, it's more likely that we use it also online. It narrows the digital language divide that we talked about before. So the fact that there's barely any content in our language. Okay, so let's just start one. There's no content in, I don't know, Limburgish. Okay, so let's just start a blog in Limburgish. I will start it, and now there'll be some content. Raise awareness of linguistic diversity. This is probably the easiest thing to do, and it's what most of us are doing on the internet. Rather than engage in language teaching, there's a lot of websites that engage in language diversity in general, on making the wider public aware of all the languages that there are. It also strengthens the connection between speakers and their language. That is the fact that if I can use it online, and I can relate to this language in my everyday life in all aspects, well, that makes this language more part of my everyday life, and therefore I'm more likely to use it. Again, this is difficult to pinpoint, and the relation between this, it's not clear, but it seems to be the case. And it creates this positive image of the minority language because we can use it for modern life. It's general criticism of minority languages, or a general stereotype that minority languages are only spoken by people in rural areas, people who don't even have internet, or people who are just working with their sheep all day long. And this is, of course, not true. And the fact that we use them in social media is challenging this also. And it's important if we want the youth to still use the minority language. Because for the youth, social media is a fact. It's something they use every single day. And so if we want them to use the minority language, when the minority language has to be ready for use or usable in this context. It comes with some challenges, of course. If we want to use the minority language in the digital sphere, we have to make the language ready for this digital world. So we need new words probably, and it may be just borrowing these words from the dominant language or making up new ones. Depends on the language, depends on different strategies. But we do need new words and new ways of saying things, which I'm not saying we should create out of the blue. It normally just happens on the internet. People start using the language and start coming up with ways of using that. And that's also a very interesting idea for minority languages. Yeah, that it's no longer that language that it's set in stone, but it's actually free to evolve in this context. And I think that's what we all want, that our language evolves and gets used in new ways, so that it doesn't die out. So social media and language revitalization, it's very tightly linked to this idea that we discussed before of the performance era, that there's new communities that emerge, and some of these communities have as their only binding aspect the fact that they share a common interest for one language. And you don't have to be in the same location. The language, I don't even have to be a native speaker of the language or an ethnically a member of that community. I can just be interested in that language, join a group online, learn the language and use it and become a speaker of that language. That's also very possible nowadays, and that's very important for small languages. And we can just start new communities all the time and new media all the time. And these are some of the aspects that make social media good for minority languages. However, there's a caveat here. There's one big problem, and that's what has been called or has been labeled audience design strategies. In general, most minority language speakers, especially the smaller the language is, this is more common, choose to use the dominant language in social media because they will be understood by more people. This is, put simply, this is the idea. If I use English in social media, more people will understand what I say, so more people will follow me, more people will like my post, etc., etc. I am myself to blame for this. I do this a lot. I tweet a lot in English. I also tweet in Catalan, but not as much. because I'm talking to people who I assume will know English rather than Catalan. And this is a problem because there's no way to deal with that. Mm. Um, Another reason that most minority language speakers don't use their language on social media is because they're not familiar with the written form, or they don't feel comfortable with the written form of the language, or they may think that their language is not good enough because it's a mixture or bastardized, it's not pure language. And that's also a problem, but it's a problem that we can all more or less address. We can use education for this. We can use other workshops. We can use different strategies to boost the ability of speakers to use their language. But it's difficult to deal with the fact that, yeah, it's true. If you tweet in English, more people will follow you. So how do we deal with that? Well, I will argue that it's virtual communities, but before we start with this, I wanted to share with you some insights from the Digital Language Diversity Project. It's a project I'm not personally involved in, but I'm familiar with. Um, it's a project with different parts of and universities from Europe, and they have researched how much a language is present online and how the speakers feel about this. And they started with 4 languages: Breton, Sardinian, Basque, and Karelian, and they developed a lot of material. You can go to their website. And they develop a lot of material for anyone to start this with their own language, right? So I think it's quite interesting. So let me get some water. And I have here 4 quotes, one for each of these languages, in which speakers are saying how they think it's important to find the language online. For example, here we have a Breton speaker saying that, all teenagers are now completely crazy with YouTube, video gaming, makeup tutorials, all these things that you can find in YouTube. And he says, this is something we're missing in Breton. So this speaker, who was, if I'm not mistaken, 70 years old, he's saying, look, we need this if we want the youth to use our language. So he recognizes the need for this. Here we have a Basque speaker saying that, the power of technology in the digital world is evident now. And in the case of Basque is also being introduced in this world. So there is some infrastructure for this, but we have to continue developing more and more because we need Basque to be in this digital world if we want it to survive. Here we have a Karelian speaker saying that, I wish that Karelian was online, because everyone uses the internet nowadays. So we need our language to also be online. Yes, Martin, you're right. English is the bigger language, yeah, but doesn't necessarily mean that you'll reach more people because not everyone is interested in the same things. Exactly, yeah. But that's also one of the problems, that very often the minority language gets often only used for things about the minority language, and we also want to change that and use it for other things. But yeah, you're right, of course. Yeah. Using the language, using English doesn't mean that all the speakers of English will read what you're saying, of course. Yeah. Exactly. Not everyone is a language nerd, right? So we also want to talk about other things so that other people sees the language and uses the language. And finally, we have a quote from a Sardinian speaker who I think is a quote that I think is quite interesting. He says that, I think one of the best ways to allow everybody to read and write in Sardinian every day is the possibility to have it on a smartphone. Because we all use our smartphone to communicate, we write, we read, and if we don't have the possibility to use it in this medium, we're not going to use it as much. Okay, I should move. We're already 40 minutes in, so I should move on. So all these things that we were talking about, all these audience strategies and the use of different languages, it has already been said for many other aspects of language revitalization that minority languages need breathing spaces. That is a space where the language is the default language, the language that we normally use. And I argue that virtual communities can be these breathing spaces for minority languages online. And this is just a community where the minority language is the only language of this community, or is the preferred language, especially if it's for learners. Therefore, you also allow different uses of different languages, but it's the preferred language, where the language is the subject of discussion, as we were saying before, but also where the status of the minority language is not contested. So it's a place where the language use is bolstered, uh, to talk about the language, but not necessarily to talk only about the language, but also to use the language to talk about any other thing, right? And here I wanted to introduce a little bit the Europe Minority Languages project. This is a project I created. So this is it's an example of an individual creating something that at first was quite small, and now it's getting bigger. So big that it's difficult for me to keep up with with this, and it's not as active as I would like it to be. We have collaborated with many different organizations from different languages, and we are currently on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We do have a YouTube channel, but we're not really using it because we don't have the time. We need somebody to get involved with this. And what we do here is we share information about different minority languages in Europe, oral and sign languages. Um, we have language profiles. For example, here is one profile, Crimean Tatar. We have some information on where this is spoken, classification of the language, how many speakers more or less, what varieties are there, and also some examples. We have generally the Article 1 of the Declaration of Human Rights because it's something that has been translated to a lot of languages, and we can therefore have the same text for all of these. And we're working with Wikipedia to also have the different videos of these speakers of these languages, so we can actually listen to these languages. How was it started? To be honest, it started at first as a project for school, for my master's in linguistics back in Barcelona. I had a subject on language diversity, and I was doing a small project on language diversity in Europe, and I started collecting all this information. And then when I finished the project, I thought, what do I do with all this information? So I created this blog post, and then after the blog post, I started on Facebook and on Twitter sharing this information because I thought, look, I've compiled all this information, so like make it useful and available for everyone. Yeah, and then it just grow, and now it's something much bigger than I ever intended it to be. But I'm very, very happy with it. So we share different things. For example, we share words of the day. We had a period of time where we shared animals in different languages. For example, here in Kashubian, the word for bird. For Christmas or for seasonal, we also have seasonal posts. So for Christmas, we shared in Merry Christmas in different languages, and Happy New Year also in different languages. We also participate in different challenges online, like the meme challenge that I'll also say something about it later, but we create some memes in different languages. It may be just pop culture references, like May the Force be with you here in Gelga in Irish, or word plays like Do you like my language, my tongue here for Aragonese. So we create different stuff for these languages. Here is another example of seasonal posts for International Women's Day. We share the word woman in different European minority languages. And we got here 33 comments. So we actually got a lot of people sharing the way they say woman in their own language or their own language variety. So we collect all these things. And that's the important part here. I'm not up to date with this, but we collect everything that people share with us. to create different databases that we're trying to to keep up to date. Yeah. We're also working now on language profiles and different language maps, because we have a problem finding language maps for most of these languages. So we're trying to do that. We are also now working on different versions of the little prints. Well, we're not translating them, we're compiling them, and we're putting them together so that we can share them, because it's also a book that has been translated to many languages, so we can have the same text in different languages, which would actually share for this to boost linguist awareness. And this is the example that I was talking about before, that we are trying to collect all these words that people share with us, the words that we find online, the words that we know, because some, as I had before in the first slide talking about this project, I do have some native speakers of some of these languages working with me, but for most of them we don't. So it's what we find online and what people share with us online we collect, and we have these Excel sheets where we have different vocabulary. We have here an example of Breton, and I think it's Lower Sorbian. Yeah. And then we're working now on other things like creating Kahoots for these languages and Quizlets, and we would really like to have YouTube, but because a lot of our followers ask for, okay, but how do you pronounce this word? But we need collaboration, of course, of native speakers to do that, but we're trying to get that. And the Polli database is a database that it's being developed by Wikitongues. It's still not public, but they're creating a database of different words in different languages. And because they have the infrastructure to do so, we're collaborating with them. So we're trying to put everything we have, or as much as possible, into their database. We also share information of languages spoken in different countries. For example, here once we shared information on the languages spoken in the UK. And we got some replies. So first of all, that Manx and Norman are not spoken in the UK because they're not really part of the UK. But we also got this message of language, of sign language. And since then, we're including sign language also. So we've worked to include sign language. Yes, this project mainly brings awareness. Yes, we share vocabulary and we share information about the languages, but it is not our goal to engage in language use, right? So it mainly brings awareness. It's also a platform to debate about these things, but it mainly raises awareness. Yes. Here I have some other examples, though, of virtual communities. For example, here is a group to learn Basque, where Basque is their main language, so most of their interactions are in Basque. But you can also use other languages, especially Spanish, to ask how to say something in Basque. We have this community of dialects in Catalan, where they discuss different ways of saying one thing in different dialects. And also, in this case, the main language is Catalan. We have this virtual community of Calabrian Greco speakers, in which Greco is not the main language, it's Italian. But it's basically because it's a community that was created to teach the language. So some of them do write in Greco in this community, but most of them write in Italian and asking about how to say things in Greco. So it's a way to teach the language. For example, this one with Piemontese, it's the main language of the group. And here it's important because Piemontese is not even recognized as a language in Italy. It's generally just thought of as a dialect. But they do have here their own language. So it's a place where speakers can go and use their language and not be told off because they're speaking dialect. And then there's other examples of other initiatives like the Meme Challenge initiative, which every year on Mother Language Day. They share different memes in different languages. Their web page is translated in a lot of languages also, so that's also something interesting. Here you have some examples of these memes. Some of them are just sharing some sayings in the language, or others are just playing with different ways or playing with pop culture references. I chose these two that have a translation in English, but they don't necessarily do, and that's the point. Actually, they encourage you to not translate these memes in English, but I thought it was easier for sharing now. There's also the Frisian Twitter Day. There's one day, the 17th of April, which is Frisian Twitter Day officially, and a lot of people get behind this. And it's the only day of the year that the hashtag Frisk has more tweets in Frisian than in Dutch, which is sad. But in any case, they do have this every year, and they're trying to push it forward so it's more used online. You have the Kimeltue or the Mapuche Facebook group. They're very active, and they even say here one of their goals is to support the diffusion and revitalization of the Mapuche language in social media. They see it as crucial. We have one example here in the chat. A very interesting Facebook group I stumbled upon is Prussian. Oh yeah, very interesting. Even though it is revitalized from a state of death, people really communicate in it there. Yes. There's also the Cornish language, which was also revitalized, and there are a lot of Facebook groups for Cornish, and they use Cornish in these groups. So it is very interesting. Yeah. Of course, and in these cases also it's even more important because Cornish speakers, for example, they're not a lot of them, and they live all around Cornwall. So the only way they can actually meet and speak the language is on social media. They can meet physically once every year or twice every year, but generally they can only use the language in social media. So these groups are crucial for that. Yeah. I have some other examples here. The Rising Voices, the Act Lenguas on Twitter. Rising Voices has this project now for this year, for the Year of Indigenous Languages, where every week a representative of one community, of one minority community, tweets about that community and shares their own experience with language revitalization. I recommend you follow this. It's very interesting. There's also other things, like you don't have to only use Facebook or Twitter. There's also YouTube. Here we have an example of TG Lurgan. This is a YouTube channel that shares cover of pop songs in Irish, and it's a hugely popular channel. For example, this song here has almost 7 million views. It's also another way to encourage language use. If you go through the comments, you will find a lot of English, but you find also a lot of Irish in these comments. So you also encourage language use through YouTube channels. And well, finally, just some of the challenges that we see then is that, well, first, not all characters are easily available on a computer. So when we write in minority languages, we may have some problems with keyboards, and that is a problem. That it's always difficult to go around. But in general, there's no major problem with European languages. In general, there's some way to work this out and to type these languages. The platforms are designed generally with English in mind, so we may have problems like hashtags. If you add an apostrophe to a hashtag, the hashtag will break into different words. So you cannot use a hashtag with an apostrophe. And if the apostrophe is part of your spelling, that poses a problem, of course. So that's something that needs to be worked out. That social media platforms are not available in most minority languages. I just had a look yesterday of the languages that Facebook has now and Twitter, because these are the two most widely used mm, platforms that use that offer different languages. There's also YouTube, but then it's also for Google Chrome. And Facebook is a little bit better in this sense, but because they have open translations, whereas Irish is only available really in Catalan, and then there's Irish, Galician, and Basque, which have a better version, so you can use them, but it's not really finished. And the problem that we talked about before, the audience design problem, that the tendency to use a global language, and that's something that we need to work with, and that's why I suggested the virtual communities. But we also have a lot of opportunities, of course. We can see that by using languages and social media, we're boosting their digital presence, that we're raising awareness of linguistic diversity, that we are creating spaces of debate about the language or in the language, and that these spaces, importantly, are available to everyone. It's not just me having my debate group here in town and inviting my friends. If I do this publicly on social media, anyone can get in, anyone can join, which sometimes may be a bit tricky because sometimes they join to discourage the debate, but still, we want to reach out to as many people as possible. Very, very important also, social media encourages minority self-representation. So it's not somebody from a majority perspective talking about us, it's we talking about us. And that's also very, very important, I think. It associates the minority language with modern life, and it has an enormous potential for research for in many aspects, and it's a huge database that we can use. So that's for linguists out there, if there are some linguists in this webinar. And finally, just because it's easier than ever to start our own media and to have it available in whatever language we want, and to have groups of practice, as many as we want, and free and accessible for everyone. Okay, so that was it. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions now, just write it now in the chat. You also have here at the end of the PowerPoint some the references I've been using, so you can check them out in your time. Yes, Instagram AM. I did not include Instagram because I've only recently started working with Instagram. Even with the European Minority Languages project, we started quite recently, which is why we only have 79 followers right now. But yes, Instagram has also a lot of possibilities. You cannot use as much language as you use in Twitter or Facebook. Twitter and Facebook are probably the most language centered, if you want, of these platforms, because you write more. But Instagram is definitely a very viable tool for this. Okay, yeah. Instagram is crucial for Russia. Okay, yeah. As I mentioned somewhere in the presentation, it does depend a lot on the social linguistic situation of each language and on all aspects of where the language is spoken and what is used there. I'm not very familiar, but I think that Facebook is not very common in Russia. You have another thing, the VK. So of course, then it's another platform, right? But the way you use it may be similar enough to export this. Instagram is growing rapidly, yes, especially with teenagers. Yes, Instagram, snapshots. What was TikTok? There's a new one called TikTok, which I just learned about 2 weeks ago. So yeah, we definitely need more. We need more presence of our languages in these contexts. Yes, Facebook and Twitter, especially Facebook, is very good for the virtual community side, but we need more. TikTok, I think it's spelled like TikTok, like this. It's small videos. You create small videos and you share small videos. So we do need more presence in these platforms. Yes, especially targeting teenagers. We are now writing a project here in Friesland to encourage the use of Frisian by teenagers. So we want um, um, to make them use the language in a fun way in social media. So we want to work with some schools for this. TikTok is for singing karaoke. I think you can also play with language with that. So you do have the music, but you can do some play words. I'm not very familiar with TikTok. I just learned about it 2 weeks ago, and I have downloaded it, but I still haven't messed around with it yet so much. What if some minority languages don't have any script? Roman scripts, nominal language scripts are the only option in this case. Yes, maybe not the only option, but uh, if if um, if minority language doesn't have a script yet, it's probably wise to use Roman alphabet or Cyrillic alphabet or any alphabet that you already have available in your phones and keyboards. It will make it easier for you. Yeah? There's one paper here in this references by Lillehaugen. Okay, the second paper here, the second starting bottom. This paper actually, it's the development of written literature in some indigenous languages of Mexico. It's a very interesting paper because these languages have no written form or not standard written form, but still they started using it on Twitter, and this paper analyzes why and how they use it and how this use actually helped with the establishment of a script. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. Okay, we are three persons promoting some minority language. Which social media strategy would you suggest for us? Where shall we invest to? That depends on your goals. If your goal is to try to attract teenagers, probably Instagram is a good choice. If you want to first establish some sort of community online, I would say Facebook is a safer bet. Speaking of orthographies, have you or any of your colleagues worked with Unicode, to develop an internet usable writing system for minority languages? I know Unicode is constantly expanding. I'm familiar with that, but I have not worked with Unicode myself. I have not, because so far I've worked with languages that either have established orthography or are using an orthography based on the Roman alphabet and not a lot of diacritics. So I've been able to get around this and use pretty standard keyboards. But Unicode is definitely something you can work with. I see some people writing. I'm sorry, I'm not I'm not more helpful here with Unicode, but I know that it's usable. How does syllabary alphabets live in social media? Well, it depends. Um, I mean, there's some, for example, Ethiopian alphabet, the Abugida of Ethiopia works, and they use it in social media. I mean, they also use English, of course, but they use their own writing. Um, I mean, the problem here is that if you have a writing system that is not used by a dominant language, it's very difficult to actually create a keyboard for you. You can do it, and some people have done it. For example, Cherokee got Google to agree to a creation of a keyboard for Cherokee. But of course, you have to push and you have to insist to do that. But there is now, and now it's Cherokee is available on Facebook, and Cherokee is available as a keyboard for most Google devices. So yeah, you can do that. And Cherokee definitely has an alphabet or a syllabary that is not used by any other language. So it is possible to do that. Could you share a bit more about your experience of revitalized languages? How did they start it in social media? Um, what do you mean exactly? How did they start in social media? So how it all started, or some specific languages? Oh, I see that some of you started following me on Twitter. Um, okay, I'm going to answer this question first, and then Elena, I think. I'm not very fluent reading Cyrillic, but I think your name is Elena. Okay, well, sorry. I think it is quite difficult to create an online community in case when a language is revitalized. Oh, you mean when a language, okay, you mean when a language is revived out of nothing, right? Because when you say revitalize, okay, I thought you meant any sort of revitalization. In general, when we talk about revitalization, it can be languages that were still spoken, but by a few people, or not used anywhere else, only in the family. So I thought you meant that. When you work with a language that doesn't have any native speakers left, actually, I'd say that virtual communities are even probably easier because there's very few of you. Most of you are set on learning the language. Otherwise, you would not be engaged in this. So it's probably easier to at least start a small community to practice this language, and then from there you can move on. This worked for Cornish. I think it kind of works for Manx, even though most of Manx speakers are actually quite close to each other. As somebody shared here, it works for Prussian. So I'd say that it's actually probably even easier for such languages, and it's definitely advisable because it's probably the only way you can use it every day. Okay. Um, this one here, we have a problem. We have invested a lot of time in translation of the VK interface to Udmurt, but actually the number of people who use Udmurt interface instead of Frisian is tragically low. What could be the way to improve it? Yeah, that is a problem, and it doesn't have a very easy answer. Yeah, somebody is trying to answer this now. There must be initiative from such service to encourage users to switch the minority language interface. Um, I'd say that the problem here is not just, we have these available now. Udmurt is available as a language for the interface, but we have to convince people to use it, and convince is never um, easy because you don't want to force this, and it has to be a free choice. So I'd say that one of the things you can do is use Udmurt in social media in an attractive way. So use it for fun stuff. Use it for stuff that is not just language or language conscious. Use it for things that normal regular people who are not generally interested in languages may want to know about, and then maybe they start using Udmurt in their social media. But I think the normal path is not using the interface in the minority language and then tweeting in your minority language. I think the normal path is that you start using it, and then you change to the interface of your in your minority language. So I think that we have to first encourage use before the interface. Do you have any page profile to follow in Facebook? Yes, the Europe Minority Languages has a page, which is called Europe Minority Languages in Facebook. Or you can always follow me. I have my full name on Facebook. What sociology research do you suggest to undertake to understand the social media status of the language better? Um, there's a lot of possibilities. I am myself now very much interested in the role of virtual communities, which is why I've been talking about this. But there's a lot of things to be seen, and I recommend that if you want to have an overview about this, check the website of the Digital Language Diversity Project. They have a lot of different. So this is the website. They have a lot of different resources that you can check. They developed some materials to calculate digital language diversity and to calculate the presence of a language. And you can use all these materials. So, and if something is not available online, you can always email them, and they may help with it. They're very open to collaboration with other languages. But why these languages became popular, or is it a community of language nerds only? Elena, so you mean the revived languages? It depends. I mean, language nerds, we do exist, and we make up a huge percentage of the language virtual communities in Facebook. So it may be, yeah, it may well be that it's just because of language nerds, but not only. I mean, there's always some other aspect to it, and a language does not get revived only because of language nerds if it's used outside um, of a very small community. So it may well be, it may well all start with language nerds, but we want to reach out of that. So that's why we have to try and reach out and do other stuff to convince other people to use the language. An inventive way to do it would be to launch a targeted ad campaign on VK Facebook. Just target with more speakers. This way, they might find out about the translation. Yeah, of course. That's one other problem. I mean, they don't even know that the translation is available. So that might be a problem. Yeah. So you want to know that you want to make them know that the translation is available, but you also want to encourage the use of the language first, because otherwise they may not even change to the new interface. Okay, so somebody's saying it should be cheap. Okay. Um, I'm wondering if you think that lack of internet access is a major factor in the underrepresentation of minority languages online, or if other factors are more prevalent. I mean, it is definitely a major factor outside of Western Europe. Um, it is definitely, I mean, the lack of internet access in by some communities is obviously the first and main reason why they are not represented online. But if we're talking about Western Europe, or even when I'm talking about Western Europe, I do include what's normally Eastern Europe. So talking about Europe in general, or most of Eurasia, I think it's not the major factor. I think the major factor is the minorization of these languages, the fact that we have been taught that our language is not good for outside the small community, and it is, and it should be. We should be trying to change that, not only in social media, in everyday life and in everyday conversations, but in social media, especially because social media is often thought of as this globalization space, this global space. And of course, a small minority language, we have been taught that it's not good for the global world. And I think that may be the main reason. It's basically ideologies um, um, and the lack of prestige. Is there any social media status indicator like rating, like social media rating? Okay. Um, I don't think there is no rating like generally accepted rating. But in the Digital Language Diversity Project did develop some sort of scale to calculate that, to measure that. So check out their webpage. They have only worked with these four languages so far, but they do have the tools for you to come up with a similar measurement for your language. So that may be an option. It's more. How popular are the podcasts in the minority languages according to your experience? Is it easier to make than a YouTube channel? Again, the popularity of anything you do in a minority language depends hugely on many things. I mean, at first, it depends, of course, on the community itself. If the community is already engaged with the language or not. It depends on the content of this podcast, of course. I mean, if a very common problem is that we often just talk about our language and we talk about why we're not using it, and we talk about what makes it different from the majority language, or we talk about the past. We talk about a past when everybody spoke the language, and we are talking about topics that most people may not be interested in. So that may be one of the reasons for popularity. Just choose topics that are popular. Easier to make than a YouTube channel. I mean, for resources, yes, because it's much easier to record speech than to record and edit a whole video. But a video will probably be more popular. People do appreciate image a lot. Um, I love this brainstorm. I'm having a bit of problem keeping up with all of you, but we will make a special session. Yeah, yeah, I would actually like to be there. This session about the lack of internet. Estonia is super cool and internet is literally everywhere, but I would not say settled language is getting better. Exactly. I mean, it's not the only reason. It cannot be the only reason, because if it was the only reason, all the languages of Europe in general, or most of Europe, would not have this problem, and we see that they do. Even Irish, as I said, it's a state language, but it has a very, very, very small digital presence. Why? Because people just use English instead. I've tried podcasting. I've tried a lot of things, and it is easier than YouTube because you don't have to worry about visuals, and it can be very easy if you have a smartphone. There's free podcasting, exactly. There's free podcastings, but again, as somebody said before, for Instagram, people prefer images, and it's true that video may attract more viewers than podcast. But it's definitely easier, and it's yeah, I mean you don't need as many resources as with video editing. Exactly, it depends on content, on how you engage. Yes, exactly. It depends on many things. Yeah. And continuity, exactly. If you start and you have two very successful podcasts, but then you stop and then you start again 3 months later, you're not going to be very popular. And it's a problem because most of us are doing this out of love for the language. We're not getting paid for this, and we don't often have time to um, to focus on this and to use. Um, I myself have the same problem with the Europe minority languages, that I don't always have time to go and check the publications, check what people are saying, and I used to publish every day myself, and now I've just automatized the process because I often don't even have the time to post. So I think I have now automatized the posts until July, so so I don't have to worry about this, and I can just check whenever I have the time. But it took me a whole week to prepare these posts. So you need the time, and we're not paid for this, so we often don't have the time. So that is a problem also. Yeah. So that's why we need more people to do this with us. Okay. Okay. One more question. Could you please say a few words about your research on intelligibility of Frisian? Okay. Totally different topic, but I have done some research on the intelligibility between Frisian and Dutch, and how we can use this to the advantage of Frisian. So I just did I designed some questionnaire and some tests to measure this intelligibility, and we found out that it's quite big. People do understand Frisian much more than they think. And what we're doing now is developing a project, a small project to change language use in the workplace in Friesland with some shops here in Friesland. And we're doing some interventions with the Frisian speakers, basically, trying to change all these attitudes and these ideas that it is rude to use Frisian with a Dutch speaker, because actually it may be the other way around. We argue that it's rude to assume that they don't understand you, and that we can and should embrace bilingual conversations if we want the language to survive. It's much more difficult to convince a non-speaker to learn to speak the language, but maybe we can convince the speaker to, okay, you understand the language, so just let me use it. I will use it. You use mine. You use yours. Sorry, I will use mine. And as long as we can communicate, that should be fine. And this is something that has already been done in Valencia for Catalan, and in Galicia for Galician, and it did work in those contexts. So we're trying to recreate this in Friesland now. Um, um, my guess is that intelligibility plays a huge role here, but they are trying to recreate the same in Wales and in the Hungarian-speaking part of Romania. So there's no intelligibility to be found, but still some speakers do have passive knowledge of the language, and maybe they cannot use the language themselves, but they can understand. So we're trying to get the native speakers to still use that language, even if the answer is in the dominant language, but the minority language should be used. About your awareness project, you said that there are very few maps on language presence. How can this be? Outdated data, no maps in Wikipedia. Um, did I mention the maps in this presentation? I mean, I think we did have some discussion on maps on the Facebook page. Maybe that's what you're referring to. I mostly mentioned that it's difficult to find accurate maps for many reasons. I mean, mainly because there's no tradition to put language distribution on some map, I would say. Um, I mean, it's very difficult to represent a language in a map because we know that in one place there are several languages spoken, and I mean, languages like Yiddish. How do you represent Yiddish in a map? It's all over the place, but it's very unrealistic to paint all of Europe as Yiddish speaking, right? And a lot of America. So it's very difficult to represent language on a map, and that is a problem because a lot of people want to see a map. As we said before, people want images and they want to see the map, but any map will always be a misrepresentation of the language. I mean, Yiddish is a great example for this, but it's not the only one, definitely. And even other languages, even like Irish. Do we paint all of Ireland as Irish speaking, or only the official Gaeltachty? Um, it's very tricky. Okay, last question. What is the key difference between your project and Ethnologue, which is also kind of a catalog with about languages? Um, okay, we have two questions. I'll answer both. Um, my project is not trying to catalog languages as Ethnologue. It does maybe say a little bit about it, especially the website, but the main part of the project is the Facebook and the um, and the Twitter and Instagram account. So the social media part is much more important. So we try to engage in social media. That's the main part of the project. But we do collect all this information about minority languages in Europe. Also, we don't. So we have a loose definition of language. We started with a much more narrow definition of language, but now it's getting loose and loose. Because what we're interested in is in the variety and diversity of languages in Europe. And if we are not here to tell anyone what they are speaking, how that is, what name the language receives, and how should they speak it. This is not our job. Our job is just to encourage them to talk about these things and encourage use or at least awareness of all these things. So I say the main difference is the social media part, and that we want to engage in these conversations. Gronings is not the same as Frisian in Friesland. No. Gronings is a low Saxon variety that has been hugely influenced by Frisian, but it's not Frisian. Here's the thing I'd like to know. I notice my language, Low Saxon, is used more and more, which might be good in itself, but not exactly always in the right ways. It's all very superficial. It's restricted to boorish and rude memes that do more harm than good for its. Okay, how does, for instance, Frisian tackle this? Um, Blocking and reporting about spam. Okay, good point. I mean, it's of course it's one of the first problems of this, that it's very likely that the language gets more used for maybe not the most appropriate things. It's used for to mock people, but that's the same exact thing we have in media, in traditional media. So social media is just recreating that, and well, one way it is reporting, or at least blocking these people and just not having it, but I think the smartest way to go about it is for you um, to come up with new uses and to export them and to share them, and there's little you can do to force people to change how they use it, but you can at least offer a model of different uses. What's the right way to use a language? That is a huge question. Yeah. It's similar to the question I asked before about, okay, but what is actual use, right? So, yeah, we can have a whole other webinar on that. It is a huge problem connected with human rights, reputation. Yeah, it's not a problem with social media. It's a much deeper problem. Yeah. And the way some so-called reconstructed Votic is not Votic language anymore. Yeah. That's another issue, the pureness of the language or the purity of these languages. I would argue, generally speaking, that it's okay if the language is not pure anymore as long as it's used. But it is a much, much deeper debate, and it's probably not easy to simplify in just one sentence. I figured, yeah, yeah, exactly, the right way to use a language. Yeah, the point is, what if there isn't anything else? But that's where activists can get in and start using it in different ways and suggest different models of different kinds of use. So I would say, yes, embrace the funny stuff, but also try to provide other models of language use. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments? If you do at the end do this this session of brainstorming, please invite me because I would really like to be there. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it too. I really like talking about these topics, and you had very interesting insights in the comments. So thank you. Oh yes, thank you. The Endangered Alphabets Project. Yes. As for the presentation, yeah. Okay, we will send to your email. Yeah, I will. Yeah, I will also post it in my academia page if anybody's interested. Academia.edu. You can just find me there, follow me. I share almost all my research, so it's everything online. I believe a lot in sharing all everything you do. So you can find most of my research in academia.edu. And yeah, and I also believe that this webinar will be available on YouTube, so you can also rewatch it or yeah. Gracias, Christian. Yeah, see you later then. Yeah. Yeah, actually, I just let me do some publicity. In May, at the end of May, there's a conference here in Friesland, and me, Christian Pischlager, who is working with Udmurt in social media, and who is here in the attendees of this webinar, together with some other colleagues, we have a 3-hour panel on social media. We will also share some information about this on later on academia. Yeah? But we do have this 3-hour panel discussion and presentations on social media that I think will be very, very interesting. The examples in Mari, yeah. I was trying to find examples for you, yeah, so more localized to this webinar and to the setting of this webinar. I will also follow you on Facebook because I think I'm not following you. Gracias. Oh, obrigado. Okay. I'm glad it was useful. Yeah. And feel free to follow me and talk to me, ask me questions. I will help as much as I can. Yeah, I mean, I'm not super powerful, but I will try to do my best to help if you have any question. Okay. Thanks for yellow tape. What do you mean yellow tape? Oh, the ribbon. Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, Martin, yeah. Una academia said it. Yeah, libertad presos políticos. Yeah. Wasn't done on purpose. I just have it here. I mean, I didn't put it up today just for the webinar. I always have it here.
You, many thanks to. We will send you the press. We have your emails. You have registered. So thanks again. That was interesting, useful, very nice group of people discussing interesting stuff. So thanks everybody. See you next time.
See you in the next webinar.